Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ChMC Masterclass digital event. My name is Natasha and I'm an events coordinator at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to David to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David, ChMC Assessment Manager at CMI, to begin the event.
Thanks, Natasha, and welcome everybody to this morning's event. I want to talk about a couple of things today. I want to talk about the background to Chartered Management Consultant and how we got to where we are. And then I want to talk about the important bit for most of us, which is about the assessment and what you can expect when you put in your application and come to be assessed for the Chartered Management Consultant status. So I guess the first question is, why Chartered Management Consultant? What was the point of this, and why did we end up where we are now as opposed to doing anything else? Well, the real reason is about harmonizing the consistency of professional approach within management consultancy, and giving our clients an opportunity to understand what we mean when we talk about quality, consistency, and value that consultants bring to the environment and bring to the clients they work with. And up until this point, there wasn't really any standard by which everybody could be measured. Everybody had experience, everybody was doing good things, but for a client, for a buyer, if you like, there was no real means of saying, well, this person meets a particular standard. It's just based on experience, on thinking when you meet them, and whether you like people, and all the things that we do when we interact with people in general. So it was decided not by us at CMI, but by us and the MCA and a number of key firms that started off this a couple of years ago, that there needed to be some consistency in order that would enable clients to make buying decisions which weren't just based on price, but were based on value and quality and consistency of quality. So that was why it started, and it was also to enable people to retain talent. You know, if you're employing people, you're engaging with staff, and they've got the status, they've got the professional recognition across the industry that says they are really good, really consistent, bring value, make a difference. That's really sought after and is really worthwhile having. And the other thing was to build a sustainable community of professional management consultants across the industry who could talk the same language, understand the same things, work together, network together, share ideas, share experiences on that basis. So that was why it came about. And there were a number of people involved in this to start with, around 10 major firms to start with, and the MCA was involved as well. We at CMI were awarded the ability to assess and award this status by the Privy Council, and we are the only awarding body that can do this. And each chartered status will have its own Privy Council award in order that it can do that. So it's a very niche and very privileged thing, and we feel very privileged to be able to be part of this. So the ChMC status, when you get it, recognises your professional standing, recognises that consistency of approach that you bring, recognises that you bring value and make a difference to your clients. It is a high standard. It demonstrates you as puts you on a standout platform as a high standard of professional, high standard in that you've achieved this and you continue to develop yourself. And that's something I'm going to come back to as we go through this morning. One of the things that's really important to remember is that ChMC status is a professional recognition, and it's not a academic qualification. It's aligned to real life industrial competencies, and we have a competency framework of 54 competencies that you have to be able to address, which are related to real life. And this is about things that I have done, things that I've made a difference with, things that I've made value and added value to the clients. Not things that I could do, but things I've actually done. It's genuine, real experiences, real hands-on practice, real hands-on experience. It's not an academic qualification. And you really need to think about that. And again, I'll talk about this a bit more as we go through this morning. But this isn't something that you just fill in once and you get it. This is a continual refreshing process through CPD. This is being very widely recognised now as the key standard for management consultants. And we have members of the Cabinet Office. Obviously, they're going to be new people coming through now, but we have members of the Cabinet Office representatives sit on the oversight board for ChMC. And this is driving ChMC as a standard that's going to be required by government, by Whitehall, when they engage with management consultants in the future. They will be looking for this standard to be in place, and they will be obviously dealing more with people that have got this standard than people that haven't. So again, really valuable status to go for, really valuable status to have. This is more than a badge. This is serious stuff. Now, it does link to other professional statuses, but linking to other professional statuses of and by itself won't get you ChMC. You still have to go through the process. You still have to go through the work. You still have to demonstrate how you meet the criteria. Some of the other statuses it links to is Chartered Manager, which again is awarded by CMI. And Chartered Manager is about managing and about management, not management consulting. And there is a difference. And if you're not a management consultant, but you are a very good manager, you need to potentially consider that one rather than ChMC. ChMC is all about management consultancy and the environment in which we work in as consultants. It links to CMC, which is the Certificate in Management Consultant. Again, it links to that equates to the applied level competencies, but having that won't get you ChMC of and by itself. It will open the door slightly, but you still have to go through and do the work. As is the same with membership of MCA, CMI, or IC. They're all really good things to have, but of and by themselves, they won't automatically get you ChMC status. That's also the same with hierarchy as well. Irrespective of where you are in an organization, you can be the top person in an organization, or you can just be coming off 5 years training program. You still have to go through the same process. The application form is slightly different, but you still have to go through exactly the same process. We don't give this to people based on their hierarchy alone. There are three main routes to getting ChMC. There's the on-program route, which is where you've come off the back of an in-house training program. You've got at least 5 years operating as a management consultant, and the application process for that is the same, but there's more to fill in terms of written evidence. We have the experienced professional route, which is where you have 7 years or more experience as a management consultant. And that will enable you to use your experience and talk about your experience and fill in slightly less of the paperwork on the written submission part of the form, which I'll talk about more in a moment. Now, if you've got neither of those, there's also the level 7 professional consulting qualification, which will get you to a point where you can go for the application as well. So if you've been through the extended diploma, that would replace the 5-year on-program route. So you still have to go through the same process, but it just gives you a different route to get to that process in the first place. We'll talk about the process a lot more as the bulk of what I'm talking about today. There are different levels in terms of achieving ChMC status. And at the moment, we have what's called the applied status, applied route, which is where you're on your way to achieving ChMC status. And this is what we term the associate ChMC status. This has recently been released. And this is something you would want to do potentially after 3 to 4 years operating as a management consultant. And this is a way of checking that you're on the right route to becoming a full ChMC status when you've achieved that, at least 5 years for the on-program route, or at least 7 years for the experienced professional route. So it's a stopgap, if you like. It's a way of saying, yes, I'm on my way. I've achieved the right things so far. I've now identified, as going through that process, the things I need to focus on in order that when I'm able to, when I've got the experience, I can go for the full Chartered Management Consultant status, and I'll be ready to do that at that process. So it's a really good stopgap on the way to becoming fully chartered once you've got that experience under your belt. So that's all the background. So the key bit, I guess most of you are here for, would be, how does all this work? How does assessment work? And what do I have to do in order to get to a point where I can go for that status and absolutely try to crack that? So there's a number of things that need to go on before you submit an application. And the first thing is really draft your application and talk to your in-house coordinator. Every firm that we deal with has an in-house coordinator, and you want to talk to them to make sure, A, you're ready, and other people think that you're ready to go for the status as well, And once you've drafted your submission, give it to that person to have a look at, and indeed give it to other people to have a look at who aren't necessarily entirely clear about what you do. Now, you may think, why is he talking about this? Why do I want to get somebody who doesn't know what I do to look at my application? And the main reason is, does it make sense? Is it English? Now, what I mean by that is every day we use lots of jargon. We use jargon in a team, we use jargon in an organization, and sometimes we forget that it's peculiar to that organization or that team. And everybody in that space knows what you're talking about, but people outside that space may not. So we need to make sure that your application is written in a way that people who don't know you would understand what you do. Think about it if you like, like your elevator pitch. Somebody at a networking function or at a party says, what do you do? And you have to tell them quickly without losing them. Think about that and expanding on that when you're getting to this point. So make sure that it's reviewed by somebody in your organization before you submit it, and make sure it's supported by a sponsor before you submit it as well. So then once you submit it, one of my expert assessors will pick it up, and all of my assessors have been through this process themselves. They have all been awarded the ChMC status, and they are all operating or either full-time or part-time as management consultants. So they know exactly what you do. They know exactly where you're coming from, the pain that you've been through, the scars that you carry. They've been through the same route as that as well. So they really, really understand what you're talking about and where you're coming from. So once you've submitted, one of my assessors will pick up your submission. They will have a look at it, have a provisional look at it and say, yes, it meets the criteria or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, they will send it back to you. And we'll talk more about that as we go through it. Once you've met the criteria, you'll be invited to have a professional discussion. And again, we'll talk about that more as well. Once you've had that professional discussion, your application will be moderated, and then you'll be informed of the outcome. And if you're successful, you'll be awarded the status and the ability to use the nominatory letters after your name so that you can show everybody else you've met that status. Big question. Everybody says, okay, this looks really good, but how long does it take? And my answer is always, how long is a piece of string? There is no set time that this will take across the board. And people approach this in different ways. Some people will say, I'm going to take a weekend and do it. I'm going to just lock myself in a room for a weekend and do it. Some people will say, I'm going to take an hour over a couple of evenings. I'm going to do half an hour every lunchtime for the week. Some people will say, I've taken 3 or 4 days off, actually just to focus on nothing else. Some people will say, I've done it over my holiday. Now, it really depends how you approach this and how you work and how you think. Now, I would say, I think it's Einstein who said, if I was asked to solve a problem and I had 2 hours to do it, I'd spend the first hour and 55 minutes thinking about it and the last 5 minutes writing it down, or something like that. I've probably paraphrased that wrong, but you get the idea. So think about what you're going to put and then start looking at a piece of paper. Now, one of the things you want to think about is treat this like a real pitch. This is not an academic exercise. So if you are asked by a client to provide a submission to get to a pitch, what would you say? How would you do it? That's what we're asking for. You're the pitch that we want to see. You're pitching yourself, thinking about what you do, how you got to be so good, how you got to be so experienced. What is it that you bring to clients? Now, in terms of how long does it take, really, we all ought to be on top of this. If somebody says, how do you get to be so good? We ought to be able to answer that question. If somebody says, what value do you bring to clients? We ought to be able to answer that question. These shouldn't be difficult, challenging questions. How we make that meet the criteria is the challenging part. So get friends with the criteria, get friends with the framework, become very, very aware of what's required in there. And then when you come to do your narrative, write your narrative, look at it, see if it meets the framework. If it touches all those bases in the framework, if you've addressed all those bits, you'll be fine. Key thing to remember, as with a pitch to a client, answer the questions. Read the question, understand the question, answer the question. It's very easy to run on about things that the client doesn't want to know about. It's very easy to include a lot of fluff in your written submission that isn't doing anything but fluffing it up and using words of a narrow word count that you don't have flexibility to do. So think about all these things before you put pen to paper. Answering the actual question, Why now? Why you should be really easy, because that's what we do all the time. We know what we do. We know what we should do. We know how we bring value to clients. So when we think about the competency framework, there's a number of areas that we look at in the competency framework. And these touch on the full breadth of being a management consultant. So we look at values, ethics, and behaviors. And this is your values, ethics, and behaviors. We're assessing you, not your business, not your team, not your colleagues. So you'll be challenged on how you have applied values, ethics, and behaviors in your workplace, how you've used your ethical background, your ethical framework to benefit clients and customers. Then we look at leadership and management, and there are various areas in there that we look at. But then we look at the client operating environment, how you're dealing with your stakeholders, how you manage an operational delivery, how are you aware of markets and what's going on. All of those kinds of things. What's your horizon scanning like? And again, this is about you, not about your firm. We know what your firms do. We may even know what your teams do, but we want to know about you, what you do. And then we look at your personal and professional development. How did you get to where you are? What development have you undertaken to get to where you are so far? And very importantly, what development are you going to do in the next 12 months? And every 12 months, we will come to you and say, this is what you said you were going to do. What have you done? And at that point, you need to be really honest. And you can be brutally honest. I planned to do this, but life happened, things got in the way, so I didn't do it. But what I did instead was X, Y, and Z. And on the back of that, what I plan to do in the next 12 months to stay at the top of my game is ABC. That's what I plan to do. And as we know, plans only survive first engagement with the enemy. So a plan is only good at the time we write it. If things change, great. Don't go back to the plan and say, make it up. This is what I did. This is what happened. This is what I'm going to do in future, because that's all live and it keeps you at the top of your game. Now, just a forethought before we go any further. When we're collecting evidence, we need to think about some guiding principles. And there are two main ones that come to mind. One is the STAR technique. So what was the situation? What was the task? What action did you take? And what was the result of that? Some people like that one. My own personal favorite is 6 Honest Serving Men from The Elephant's Child by Kipling. So I like to think about what, why, when, how, where, and who. What did I do? Why did I do it? When did I do it? Who did I do it for? Making sure that I'm keeping that anonymous and not breaking any of the confidentiality rules. Where did I do it? What was the outcome? How did it happen? All of those things that we need to think about in order to say what we've done. This is what I've done. This is why I did it. This is how it played out. And this is what I learned from it. This is how I would do it again. This is how I would do it differently. All of those things. I find that a really helpful framework. That said, not all tools work for all people. So if you find a tool, you have a tool that works for you, use that. Use whatever works for you. Take the tools and make use of them. So when we look at your evidence, we're looking for a number of things. We're looking that it meets the framework and it's valid. So we talk about it being valid evidence. It's not fluff. It's not in there as filler. It meets the framework criteria in some shape or form. Now, there are 54 competencies in the framework, and you don't have to have 54 answers. One sentence, one piece of narrative can cover a number of competencies if you do it right. If you think about being that ABC of communication, accurate, brief, and clear. So make sure your narrative touches as much as possible. It needs to be authentic. So it's your answers, your submission, not something that somebody else has written for you, not something that you've borrowed off somebody else and thought, oh, that looks good. Not something from your job description, because that's, we all have a job description. That's not necessarily what we do. It's a guide to what we might or ought to be doing. So think about that. Is your evidence valid? Does it touch the criteria? Is it authentic? Is it about you? Now, just a word of warning, if it isn't about you, we will find out really quickly. So don't fall into that trap. Is it current? Is your evidence current? Do you still use the knowledge and skills you're talking about? Do you still do the things that you're talking about? Have you done those in recent time? Not going back 20 years. If the last time you did something was 20 years ago, don't feel that you need to include that. What can you do today? What did you do last week? What did you do last year, the year before that? That you can repeat today if asked to do so. And is your evidence sufficient? Is there enough evidence for an assessor to say, yep, we'll go on to the professional discussion? Because that's the aim of the written submission part of this. That's what we're trying to get to. Now, there are three parts to the assessment. There's the written submission, which will get you to the professional discussion if there's enough of it and it does all the things we've talked about so far. Then there's the professional discussion. And then following on from that, if you're successful, then there's the continuous professional development element that I've talked about. We'll come to every year, ask you how you're staying at the top of your game, because that's really important. So when you're putting together your written submission, all the things we've talked about so far, but what I want you to think about is, why should I be awarded ChMC status? Why me and why now? So think about, what difference have you made? How have you made the difference? Where was the difference measured? Who else would agree that you made a difference? When did you make the difference? What was that difference? What was the outcome of that difference? So think about all those things when you're putting together your narrative and align that with the competency framework. People often say to me, I've not started this yet. When do you think I should start collecting evidence? Well, if you haven't started, start now. Start as soon as you get off this call, start collecting evidence. Get as much evidence as you can, stick it all in a folder, and then select the evidence that best represents you, and select the evidence that best presents you in the best light possible. Connect that evidence to the framework, the competency framework. You don't have to use all of it, but the more you've got, the more your options you've got to take from. Connect it to the framework, then reflect on it and say, is this doing what I think it's doing? Give it to somebody else, have a look at it. Is this displaying the best me? Would you agree that this meets the criteria? Does this make me look the best I can possibly look? And only when you get to that point, you can go around that circle a number of times, but only when you get to that point that you agree, yes, it does all of those things, and it touches the criteria, and it reflects the best of me, and it's in English that anybody can understand, and it is in effect a pitch, then you're ready to submit it, and it will get picked up by one of my assessors and get moved on. So when we think about that narrative, we need a narrative that's going to tell us a story, not stuff that we could pick up off a job description. So things like, at a leadership and management level, this translates to providing stretch opportunities to bring in the best out of people by creating a safe place for them to work and grow. And the first thing you can say to that is, so what? We all do that. That's what everybody is expected to do as a leader and a manager. It's what everybody's expected to do as a team leader, as a leader of other people. So what? What difference did that make? Where did you do it? Why did you do it? So that could be classed as weak evidence. So don't fall into that trap. We need specifics. I was at the spearhead in leading and managing a client through change that would change the way staff worked with their supplier and customer, developing new skills, new ways of working, new governance and management financial structures. So we've got that, what's going on, that evidence there, that starting to show more about you. I would then go on to add specifics. What were the specifics that touched? What was the specific outcome of that? But we're starting to tell that story. It's good narrative evidence. It's about you. So be very clear about the evidence that you're putting in. Some takeaways from the written submission. It's about you. It's about how you make a difference. Your submission should tell your story, not your team's story. We know what your team do. We know what your firm do. Would somebody who doesn't know you understand what you're saying? And remember, it's about quality, not quantity. And the purpose of it is to get you the ticket to the dance. And the dance is the professional discussion where all the good stuff happens. Now, sometimes you will get a referral. As I said earlier, if you haven't got enough evidence, your assessor may send it back to you. Don't see this as a bad thing. This is a second opportunity to make your submission really shine and get you to the next stage. The problem that you have if you get a referral is the word count goes down. It's a limited word count anyway, and I make no apologies for that, but it goes down on the referral. So give it your best shot for the first go, because the second go will get harder to do. Now, you only get 2 goes at this, so make sure you've done the best submission possible in your mind and in the mind of anybody else who you can ask to have a look at it before you submit it onto the system, because once you submit it onto the system, the clock is running. So think about that. We want to get you to the next stage. Now, the next stage, the professional discussion, happens online. It's a virtual process on a system like this. The very, very worst situation is it will happen on the telephone. Now, I say that's the worst situation because we want to see you. We want to make sure that you're the person we should be having the discussion with. We want to have as much interaction with you as possible. And we all know that something like 7% of our communication is based on the spoken word. Everything else is the visual and the non-verbals and all of those things. So we want to be able to see you as much as possible. We want to interact with you as much as possible. The discussion will last approximately an hour, depending on the route you go on. But I would make sure you allow 2 hours in your diary, because sometimes the discussions run on, and if they run on a bit, it doesn't mean anything except we want to talk to you a bit more. We may not have everything we want, and we want to get a bit more out of you, or we may just be having a really interesting discussion that we don't want to stop dead on an hour. So make sure you've got time in there. Bring enough time to the session that you can turn up physically and mentally, emotionally, and ready to go and have the discussion, which will be a dynamic, free-flowing discussion. The discussion will validate your evidence in your submission. So have your submission with you, have your written submission on your desk, because the assessors are going to refer to that. The assessors are going to say, you talked about this. Tell me about how that worked out. How did that play out for you? What were the ethical challenges you faced in that? What were the finances like around that? All those kinds of things. It's not a Q&A. It's an actual discussion between two professionals. They will have a discussion about your CPD, and they will talk to you about ethics. So be prepared to have all of those discussions as we go through. This, as I said, this isn't academic. It's not a Q&A. It's not a test. We're not trying to trick you. We want you to pass. We want people to get through this successfully. But you can pass or fail this. You can get to this stage and fail. So you need to come best prepared as you can to deal with this professional discussion. Be ready. Be there alert. Be emotionally present. Be 100% present. Don't be thinking, oh, I've got to get to a meeting. Oh, are you going to hurry up because I need to be gone by 11:30? So no, that's not going to work. Give yourself time before and after. And for that session, treat us as your most important client for that session. Make sure you turn up physically, mentally, and emotionally and ready to go. As I say, treat us as you would an important client, but be the consultant that you can be on that day. This is all about you. All about you, not about your team, not about anybody else. It's I, Captain. This is what we want to see about you. Now, let's not beat around the bush here, because that's really difficult for some of us. Those of us that grew up in the West, and specifically in the UK, are always told from being small children, it's not about you, it's about us. It's not about you, it's about the team. It's we. There's no I in team. It's all that stuff goes on. This is your opportunity to tell us all about you, but it is a challenge, and there's no bones we make about that. That's difficult for a lot of us. So make sure that you focus on that. Make sure you get that in your head. We want you to succeed. We're not going to waste your time. If we don't think you can achieve the professional discussion, we won't take you on to professional discussion. We will fail you at the written submission part. So if you've got to professional discussion, prove us right. Come, turn up, be the best that you can be. We want to hear all about you and why you should be awarded ChMC status. Top tips for you to take away: make friends with the framework criteria. Get to know that really well before you start your written submission. We don't want fluff, we don't want filler, and we don't want so what. Everything that's in there has to link to the criteria. You'll be asked to cross-reference to the criteria. And if you write something in your written submission that you can't cross-reference, think about why it's in there. If it's contextual narrative and it's quite short, that's probably okay. If it's large paragraphs of stuff that you can't link to the criteria, ask yourself why it's in there, because it probably doesn't need to be, and it's probably not doing you any service. So think about that. Remember what you told us in the written submission, because we're going to dig into that in the professional discussion. Make sure you plan for it. Don't do anything else for that 2 hours that you're with us. Have a bit of a practice, but then stop, because you don't want to over practice, because you over practice on things, you'll kill it. We're not looking for a script. We're not looking for a model of what you think a consultant is. We're looking for you to be the best consultant you can be. And finally, ask yourself, how are you? Am I ready to do this? Am I in the right place? Have I given it enough time? Have I driven to work this morning and run over the dog and had an argument with everybody at the traffic lights? Am I worrying that when I get home, my partner's packed all my stuff and it's going to be on the door waiting for me because we've had a terrible time? Think about all these things. Life happens. Are you in the right space to do this? Are you in the right space to do it now? If not, give yourself some time, because, we want you to succeed. Give yourself the best opportunity as well. So that's it from me. That's the input from me in terms of the presentation. We're going to go back to the studio now, and we're Really pleased to be joined by Tricia Phillips this morning from Cadence Innova. Hi Tricia, and welcome. Really pleased to have you with us this morning. Great to work with you today.
Hi David, and thanks for that very informative presentation.
You're welcome, and I hope everybody else found it useful as well. One of the things I think is really useful, it's all, and why we ask you on really, is it's all very well for me to say these things, isn't it? Because I would, and if we're brutally honest, that's what I get paid for. And there's a company line to follow, and everybody out there is probably thinking, yeah, well, you would say this because you want us all to do it. And I think it's really useful to hear from other people that have been through the process, and you yourself have been through the process. And I wonder if you can, with that in mind, I wonder if you can tell us what you think is the hardest bit about the written submission stage. What advice would you give people about the written submission?
So everything that you've shared with us today, of course, comes to mind when you sit down to write the submission. But as we know, as consultants, our lives are exceptionally busy, and there's always another milestone or deadline or something else to do. And I found actually carving out that time to sit down and write the submission was probably the hardest part. And of course, in order to do that, I needed to be really familiar with the framework and what the 54 competencies were in order to even begin. So a bit like you were saying, I kind of took the view that I would do this at a weekend. I actually started my journey over the Christmas period, and I set aside some time to really kind of get underneath it. But that's kind of the approach that I took. I carved out my own time. I knew I would never make it work if I tried to block time in my diary in the working world. So that was my personal choice, because it mattered. It mattered to me professionally, and of course, Cadence supported it as quite right they should. But I did find that I needed to do it in my own time for my own sanity.
And a lot of people, it's interesting you say about the value. A lot of people tell us that one of the biggest values they get out of this process is having that time to reflect and to review and say, I am good. How did I get to be this good? How did I get to be where I am? And you mentioned about how busy we all are, and everybody's going from one assignment to the next, to the next, to the next, and we can often compartmentalize, can't we, and not go back and think, yeah, actually, I grew in that one. And I can see how much I've grown in that assignment. I was there 18 months or 2 years or whatever it was. And, I was a very different person at the end of that 2 years than when I started, because I don't know about you, but every time we go into a client for the first time, it's a bit scary, isn't it? You don't know really what you're looking for. There's a process sort of ticking over. I'm going to check this and do that and talk to these people and identify the stakeholders and all that. But because we're rushing around, having that time to stop and review that, I think is quite valuable. And would you echo that when you did yours?
Yeah, for sure. So we have inside Cadence, we do personal planning, and part of that is reflection. So at the end of each assignment, as part of the close down, we think about as an individual and as a team, what did we learn? How did we grow? What would we do differently? And we give each other feedback. So that was really useful. But of course, it still falls into that point of, as the leader, which I did experience, it was more about the feedback I give others. And so it really did make me sit up and recognise that the feedback that I get isn't necessarily as deep and meaningful, because I don't always follow it up. I'm always very busy giving feedback to others. And that was really the biggest lesson learned for me when I started the process. To your point around talking about I'm happy to admit that I failed the first time, as you will know, David. So I put my first submission in, and it came back as no, that's you don't meet the criteria. And that was a bit of a shock, given my background, my experience, the wealth of consulting assignments that I've done and so forth. But actually, it's because I was talking about team, and you quite rightly say, this isn't a charter ship for your team, this is for you as an individual. And that was a bit of a shock, but a great learning opportunity. And I had agreed internally that I would be the go first, the fail fast. So that was really a good reminder that we too have a part to play in the teams that we lead and the work that we do. And so for me, that was the biggest learning curve, was to talk about myself and my value as an individual to the clients that I work with.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that with us. I think everybody listening will find that really, really valuable. I would just add that you did go on to successfully achieve it. Yeah.
I did.
And that's brilliant. And I think equally that's valuable as well. It's a knock, it's hard, but it's a bit like, well, I'll talk a bit more about that with the professional discussion, but it's a snapshot in time, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think that's really, really valuable for everybody listening, for you to share that. And thank you for that. So when you actually had got through that process and you got to the professional discussion element of it, what would you say was the hardest part, or the most challenging part about the professional discussion?
I actually found the professional discussion really interactive and really interesting. And I was quite nervous, again, kind of talking about self and look at me, look what I did. And I'm not very comfortable with that, as most management consultants will know. We use a lot of our time thinking about others and reflecting on their challenges, not our own.
Yeah.
But getting into the actual conversation was really easy. And I was working with Simon, one of the assessors, and he just made it like a conversation. You described it like that, and it absolutely felt like that. And the hour and 45 minutes disappeared really quickly. And I felt that it was just a conversation. And of course, we know ourselves really well. And to your point around preparation, these are facts. These are things that we have done in our careers. This is who we are when we think about ethics. And so actually it was a lot easier than I'd imagined, because I wasn't trying to convince him of anything. I was simply sharing myself, my experience and my beliefs. And he made it really easy to do that. It was very conversational.
Yeah, they're very good, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But they are very good.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It is a real conversation, and I think that's important to sort of clarify with people. This isn't a grilling. This isn't a Q&A. I'm going to ask you this, and I'm going to move on. It's very much a discussion between two professionals and two peers, and I think that's really useful to remember.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think we can all fall into the trap of is as we progress in our careers and as we mature in our careers, I don't know about you, but I've certainly funneled down into a specific niche, and my area of expertise really now, I would say, is about people and change. And when I went through the process, I found the challenge was to reflect on the wider elements of the criteria and say, well, how do I still meet these? And I did, obviously, because I was awarded the status. But I think it's how have you dealt with that in your own career, and have you had to funnel down into a specific criterion? Looking at the when you put in the assessment, how did you deal with that issue?
So that was interesting, because I don't have what I would call a niche, not in a traditional management consulting within management consulting lens. I come from business. I've run companies, and actually I found that quite the challenge to say, well, where do I add the most value? But of course, that was another learning point from the conversation around the failure. So if I may, just to describe a little more around that. So as a result of failing, I actually made a call, and David, you kindly took my call, and I say that because I found the whole process very supportive, rather than, no, it's your problem, you need to convince us. This isn't a tender. This isn't one person wins. This is absolutely about bringing a standard to an industry that we all know and love. And so I found it very supportive. But what came out of that was, what do I bring to the table? And you mentioned earlier in your conversation, David, in presentation, around how consultants operate. There's no interest in the methodology. That's just the methodology. I had to really dig deep around, what do I bring to the table that makes me quite unique? And what is it that makes me stand out in? I think MCA yesterday or the day before reported 88,000 of us. 88,000 of us operating in the UK. So what is it that I bring to the table with my clients that makes me stand out? And I had to really unpack that as part of this process, which was really valuable.
Yeah, so really, and other people have said the same thing to me. It's, having that opportunity to unpack that and reflect is really, really useful. And I guess when we do that exercise, it gives us more confidence for the next engagement we have, doesn't it? And the next people we talk to, because we can all sometimes forget how good we are. And it's only when somebody else says something that you flush up and go, oh, okay, thank you.
I think it kind of made me or helped me to realise how much exposure to business challenges I've gained over my 30 years in industry. And I didn't have a traditional consulting background, as in I didn't join a firm and develop as a consultant. I actually, as I said, came out of industry, out of business, and actually on the request of some CEOs that I'd been working alongside, got into consulting in that way. And to actually then consider myself a true consultant, that's why this was very important to me. It was like, let me hold up this yardstick and let me see if I'm just a business person playing in consulting or if I'm a management consultant. And that's why it became important to me. And to use the framework was really useful because, of course, it helps you to understand what the criteria is, because a lot of firms have different criteria. But I came through, as I said, I came through the business pathway and gained kind of I always say to clients, I actually can deliver the work, but equally I have the scars. I was the one at the other end receiving the outcomes and standing up to the board on how successful it had been. So really valuable to have that time to reflect.
Yeah, interestingly, I came to it from a similar point of view. I didn't start off as a management consultant. I came to it after years in industry. So yeah, similar route. I guess before we hand over to the floor to see if we've got any questions from the floor, if you had to give one piece of advice, somebody came to you and said, I'm thinking of doing ChMC, what one piece of advice would you give me? What would that be?
I would echo your point around it's never too early to start. So familiarise yourself with the framework and really think about how you meet the criteria. Now, it's not that you're going to put all 54 into your application itself, but it's really valuable to understand how they interconnect and where they turn up for you as an individual. So I think that never too early to start and use the framework to begin that process. That would really be my advice.
Brilliant. Thank you. We're going to go back to the studio now to Natasha, because I think we might have some questions, but stay with us, Tricia, because you feel free to pick up on any of the questions that you feel are appropriate.
Thank you, David. So we do have a question that's coming from the live audience. It says, can a consultant that is self-employed achieve ChMC? And if so, how would the evidence be corroborated?
That's a really good question. And I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to not try and pronounce your name, but I appreciate the question. Thank you very much for that. Yes is the simple answer. You can be self-employed. We have a lot of independent consultants going through the process. The corroboration is slightly different, and you need to find somebody who you trust, who is a peer, who is a mentor, ideally. And as a consultant and as a senior manager in any kind of sphere, we all need those mentors, don't we? We all need to be able to have a safe space where we can say to somebody, I'm having a challenge here. I don't feel safe talking about this with my colleagues. What am I going to do? What would you advise? How would you look at this? And having those mentors is really important. And if you've got a mentor, I would go to them and ask them to corroborate your evidence, to be your sponsor. If you don't have a mentor, I would seriously think about getting a mentor and developing that relationship in the future. But if you haven't got a mentor and you're about to submit, go to somebody you trust. It shouldn't really be your first choice to go to a client, but if that's the only choice you have, then do that. But first of all, I would try and find a peer, somebody else you work with, somebody who you trust their opinion. And when I say somebody who trusts their opinion, not somebody that's going to echo what you say, somebody who will challenge what you say. Because if we just have people echo what we say, you might say, what's the point? I might as well do this myself. I'm brilliant, aren't I? Yes, you are. Well, that's not the same as saying you are in certain areas, but you could develop here and you could develop there. And have you thought about this? But to go back to the main crux of your question, being self-employed isn't going to stop you from achieving the ChMC status.
Thank you. So from self-employment to internally, does experience as an internal consultant impact eligibility?
We often get this question as well, and this is a great question. The fact that you're an internal consultant doesn't impact your eligibility, but you have to ask yourself, am I actually a consultant? Now, what I mean by that is you need to make sure that you are operating as an internal consultant rather than as a PM or just a really good manager. If you're a really good manager, there are other statuses you could go for, like chartered manager, for example. If you're a PM, there are statuses you can go for to recognise what you bring to the party as a PM. But for this status, you need to just look at the criteria, get friendly with the framework, make sure that you fulfil the requirements of a management consultant, and being internal doesn't provide a barrier to that. We have people from the military, for example. We have people from the public sector, from the health sector, from law enforcement, who are internal consultants, operating as management consultants within a firm, employed by a firm. Doesn't stop them as long as you meet the criteria. Tricia, have you experienced people in that position as well?
Yeah, so we have a number of people within Cadence who do internal projects, and our feedback to them is to, again, using the framework, what elements of the framework. So if your internal projects are there elements of the framework that you meet, then you have to then ask yourself, am I a specialist offering independent advice? And I think that for me is the critical part. You've mentioned it there, David. Am I holding up the mirror, or am I just executing task? And I think that's the question to ask. And we often say, if you're doing internal, you can absolutely start to build out your credibility, but it's that crux question. Am I offering independent advice?
Yeah, that's really good advice, Tricia. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
That's so much more succinct than I put it.
So obviously you said that, the application process, how long is a piece of string, but how long would you say the accreditation process takes? Is that the same kind of, depends?
Are we talking about accreditation for a firm to be able to put people through the training for this, have people's training accredited? I'm going to be completely honest here and say I don't have anything to do with the firm's accreditation side of it. But if whoever's asked that question would like to drop us an email, we will get somebody to respond to that for you, because what I wouldn't want to do is give you the wrong period of time over there. In terms of the assessment process, becoming accredited as an individual awarded the status, it really depends. Once you've written your written submission, once you've submitted your written submission onto the AO Docs portal and everything happens online, once you're ready, we will give you a access key to get into that. You would submit that. We will then pick that up within 48 working hours. So 2 working days. The assessor will have a look at it and make initial contact with you to introduce themselves. They will then have a first look at that within 5 working days and get back to you. And at that stage, the clock stops. And the clock stops because one of 2 things will happen. Either you will get a referral and be asked for more evidence, in which case you have 14 days to submit additional evidence. If the evidence meets the criteria and we're going to take you on to the next stage, the clock stops until you've both had a discussion that says, I can do this at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, or I can do it at 2 o'clock on a Monday afternoon in 2 weeks' time. That's the kind of level of thing that goes on between you and the assessor. So there's no service level agreement on that, if you like. Once the professional discussion has been arranged and has taken place, we then have 15 working days to supply you with your result. Now, we have that long of time because the assessor has the opportunity to reflect on the discussion. We don't get off the discussion and go, that was brilliant, right, boom. Because if that happens, what is the risk there? Well, the risk is I say, yeah, that was brilliant because we really got on and I really like you and it's really lovely chat. And then I reflect on it while I'm having coffee and I think, hold on a minute, did he or she actually answer that question? Did the evidence they gave me meet the criteria? So there's an opportunity for the assessor to go back, look at what they've seen on the recording, because all the professional discussions are recorded, look at the recording, reassess you potentially, have some time to do that, consider their thinking, consider their thoughts about the whole experience. Then it will go off to be moderated by an internal moderator. And so that's why we have the 15 days to get back to you to give you your result. Long-winded answer to that question. I am sorry about that.
I found it really efficient. And if I may, David, I hope this is okay. The 14 days, that sounds quite arbitrary. And having failed the first time round, it was a bit of a shock. I don't often find lots of hours in a 14-day window. And I've found that the team were really open to a conversation about mitigating circumstances to extend that if needed.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't an automatic, but again, I think what I would say is that there are people at the end of this process, and they really are helpful and open to conversation around helping you to achieve what it is you're aiming to achieve, rather than it being a tender process where no one wants to talk to you once the tender's been submitted.
Absolutely. No, that's a really good point, Tricia. And to echo your point, there are people on both sides of this, and life happens, doesn't it? Our independent assessors, and they are all independent, have things happen. Our applicants have things happen. Things sometimes have to change, and we have that flexibility. So we have a framework and a timescale, but there is flexibility built in there.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And so what benefit would you say holding ChMC gives you versus years of experience in consulting?
Tricia, do you want to have a go at this one? I have an answer, but it'd be interesting to hear.
I didn't see it as a versus. I felt that I was able to validate all of the years of experience. And I think that the early part of this call talks about the industry standards. And I think with so many organisations and so many people in the industry, it's a really good way of benchmarking. So for me, it was more about the benchmark and actually meeting that benchmark, rather than just a way of evidencing my background. Because clients are pretty happy when they see their CV anyway. But it as you said, David, central government looking at it at the moment, it is a good benchmark. So that was the attraction.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as a versus.
No, and I'm so glad you said that, because I would say it's not either or. It's both. And everybody who goes for it has to make up their own mind as to the value they see in it, because it's not just a thing to do because it's a thing to do. It's a thing to do because it is a quality benchmark, and it will put you head and shoulders above people that haven't got it. But it's not either or.
And I think it's also, going back to a point that was made earlier, it distinguishes between contracting, project management and consulting, because they are actually different things, but often they're conflated. Yeah. So I think it's useful from that perspective.
Brilliant, thank you.
Great. Well, we don't have any more questions in the chat. We did have a couple of questions from Tom, but we've asked him to reach out to us directly because they're more personal questions. So that is it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, David, and our special guest, Tricia, for your insights and expertise. For any additional information and guidance, please contact your firm's ChMC Program Manager or a member of the ChMC team at chmc@managers.org.uk. A recording of this webinar will be made available to all those who have booked for the event. Please do take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing our evaluation form. The link is in the live chat. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the day.